Good afternoon and welcome to the International Great Black Read Aloud Day. It is day 7 in our 6th year here at TIGBRAT, as we call it, of giving voice to words written by Black people all around the world. And today is day 7. It is Historical Fiction Nonfiction Day. And we are truly excited about our selection today. So, we're going to read. We got two short stories that we want to share with you, and we believe that you will find them interesting. And they are historical fiction. And our first selection will be from Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, and that one is titled Two Offers. And the next one will be from Nella Larsen, and that one is entitled The Wrong Man. And so we will get right to it. My name is LD Robinson. I'm your reader. I keep looking up because that's where my screen is for me to manage the stream. We hope you're having a good afternoon. This is afternoon when I'm reading this. So we hope you're having a good Saturday afternoon. All right, so we're going to get to our reading. And as I said, today is day 7, excuse me, is historical fiction and nonfiction literature day. And our first selection, excuse me, is titled Two Offers, written in 1859. And it is um, it is a short story, and we will commence to reading. Two offers. What is the matter with you, Laura, this morning? I have been watching you this hour, and in that time you have commenced a half dozen letters and torn them all up. What matter of such grave moment is puzzling your dear little head that you do not know how to decide? Well, it is an important matter. I have two offers for marriage, and I do not know which to choose. I should accept neither, or to say the least, not at present. Why not? Because I think a woman who is undecided between two offers has not love enough for either to make a choice. And in that very hesitation, indecision, she has a reason to pause and seriously reflect lest her marriage, instead of being an infinity of souls or a union of hearts, should only be a mere matter of bargain and sale, or an affair of convenience and selfish interest. But I consider them both to be very good offers, just as many a girl would gladly receive. But to tell you the truth, I do not think that I regard either as a woman should the man she chooses for her husband. But then, if I refuse, there is the risk of being an old maid, and that is not to be thought of. Well, suppose there is. Excuse me. Well, suppose there is. Is that the most dreadful fate that can befall a woman? Is there not more intense wretchedness in an ill sorted arrangement, more utter loneliness in a loveless home than in the lot of the old maid who accepts her earthly mission as a gift from God and strives to walk the path of life with earnest and unfaltering steps? Oh, what a little preacher you are! I really believe that you were cut out for an old maid, that when nature formed you, she put in a double portion of intellect to make up for a deficiency of love. And yet you are kind and affectionate. But I do not think that you know anything of the grand, overmastering passion or the deep necessity of a woman's heart for loving. Do you think so? Resumed the first speaker. And bending over her work, she quietly applied herself to the knitting that had lain neglected by her side. During this brief conversation, but as she did so, a shadow flitted over her pale and intellectual brow, a mist gathered in her eyes, and a slight quivering of the lips revealed a depth of feeling to which her companion was a stranger. But before I proceed with my story, let me tell you a slight history of the speakers. They were cousins who had met life under different auspices. Laura LaGrange was the only daughter of rich and indulgent parents who had spared no pains to make her an accomplished lady. Her cousin, Jeanette Alston, was the child of parents rich only in goodness and affection. Her father had been unfortunate in business, and dying before he could retrieve his fortunes, left his business in an embarrassed state. His widow was unacquainted with his business affairs, and when the estate was settled, Hungry creditors had brought their claims and the lawyers had received their fees. She found herself homeless and almost penniless, and she who had been sheltered in the warm clasp of loving arms found them too powerless to shield her from the pitiless, pelting storms of adversity. Year after year she struggled with poverty and wrestled with want, till her toil worn hands became too feeble to hold the shattered cords of existence, and her tear dimmed eyes grew heavy with the slumber of death. Her daughter had watched over her with untiring devotion, had closed her eyes in death, and gone out into the busy, restless world, missing a precious tone from the voices of earth, a beloved step from the path of life. Too self reliant to depend on the charity of relations, she endeavored to support herself by her own exertions, and she had succeeded. Her path for a while was marked with struggle and trial, but instead of uselessly repining, she met them bravely, and her life became not a thing of ease and indulgence, but of conquest, victory, and accomplishments. At the time when this conversation took place, the deep trials of life had passed away. The achievements of her genius had won her a position in the literary world, where she shone as one of its bright particular stars. And with her fame came a competence of worldly means, which gave her leisure for improvement and the riper development of her rare talents. And she, that pale intellectual woman, whose genius gave life and vivacity to the social circle, and whose presence threw a halo of beauty and grace around the charmed atmosphere in which she moved, had at one period in her life known the mystic and solemn strength of an all absorbing love. Years faded into the misty past, had seen the kindling of her eye, the quick flushing of her cheek, and the wild throbbing of her heart at tones of a voice long since hushed to the stillness of death. Deeply, wildly, passionately, she had loved. Her whole life seemed to like the pouring out of rich, warm, and gushing affections. This love quickened her talents, inspired her genius, and threw over her life a tender and spiritual earnestness. And then came a fearful shock, a mournful waking from that dream of beauty and delight. A shadow fell around her path. It came between her and the object of her heart's worship. First, a few cold words, estrangement, and then a painful separation. The old story of a woman's pride, digging the excuse me, digging the sepulchre of her happiness, and then a new made grave, and her path over to the spirit world, and thus faded out from that young heart her bright, brief, and saddened dream of life. Faint and spirit broken, she turned from the scenes associated with the memory of the loved and lost. She tried to break the chain of sad associations that bound her to the mournful past. And so, pressing back the bitter sobs from her almost breaking heart, like the dying dolphin, whose beauty is born of its death anguish, her genius gathered strength from suffering, and wondrous power and brilliancy from the agony she hid within the desolate chambers of her soul. Men held her as one of earth's strangely gifted children, and wreathed garlands of fame for her brow, when it was throbbing with a wild and fearful unrest. They breathed her name with applause, when through the lonely halls of her stricken spirit was an earnest cry for peace, a deep yearning for sympathy and heart support. But life, with its stern realities, met her. Its solemn responsibilities confronted her, and turning with an earnest and shattered spirit to life's duties and trials, she found a calmness and strength that she had only imagined in her dreams of poetry and song. We will now pass over a period of 10 years, and the cousins have met again. In that calm and lovely woman, in whose eyes is a depth of tenderness tempering the flashes of her genius, whose looks and tones are full of sympathy and love, we recognize the once smitten and stricken Jeanette Austen. The bloom of her girlhood had given way to a higher type of spiritual beauty, as if some unseen hand had been polishing and refining the temple in which her lovely spirit found its habitation. And this had been the fact. Her inner life had grown beautiful, and it was this that was constantly developing the outer. Never in her early flush or womanhood, when an absorbing love had lit up her eyes and glowed in her life, Had she appeared so interesting as when, with a countenance which seemed overshadowed with the spiritual light, she bent over the deathbed of a young woman, just lingering at the shadowy gates of the unseen land. Has he come? Faintly but eagerly exclaimed the dying woman. Oh, how I have longed for his coming, and even in death he forgets me. Oh, do not say so, dear Laura. Some accident may have detained him, said Jeanette to her cousin. For on that bed from whence she will never rise, lies the once beautiful and light-hearted Laura Lagrange, the brightness of whose eyes has long since been dimmed with tears, and whose voice had become like a harp, whose very chord is tuned to sadness, whose faintest thrill and loudest vibrations are but the variations of agony. A heavy hand was laid upon her once warm and bounding heart, and a voice came whispering through her soul that she must die. But to her, the tidings was a message of deliverance, a voice hushing her wild sorrows to the calmness of resignation and hope. Life had grown so weary upon her head, the future looked so hopeless. She had no wish to tread again the track where thorns had pierced her feet and clouds overcast her sky, and she held the coming of death's angel as the footsteps of a welcome friend. And yet, earth had one object so very dear to her weary heart. It was her absent and for recreant husband. I think that supposed to be miscreant husband. For since that conversation, she had accepted one of her offers and become a wife. But before she married, she learned that great lesson of human experience in woman's life, to love the man who bowed at her shrine, a willing worshiper. He had a pleasing address, raven hair, flashing eyes, a voice of thrilling sweetness, and lips of persuasive eloquence. And being well versed in the ways of the world, he won his way to her heart, and she became his bride, and he was proud of his prize. Vain and superficial in his character, he looked upon marriage not as a divine sacrament for the soul's development and human progression, but as the title deed that gave him possession of the woman he thought he loved. But alas for her, the laxity of his principles had rendered him unworthy of the deep and dying devotion of a pure hearted woman. But for a while he hid from her his true character, and she blindly loved him, and for a short period was happy in the consciousness of being beloved. Though sometimes a vague unrest would fill her soul, when, overflowing with a sense of the good, the beautiful, and the true, she would turn to him, but find no response to the deep yearnings of her soul, no appreciation of life's highest realities, its solemn grandeur and significant importance. Their souls never met, and soon she found a void in her bosom that his earth-born love could not fill. He did not satisfy the wants of her mental and moral nature. Between him and her, there was no affinity of minds, no intercommunion of souls. Talk as you will of woman's deep capacity for loving, of the strength of her affectional nature. I do not deny it. But will the mere possession of any human love fully satisfy all the demands of her whole being? You may paint her in poetry or fiction as a frail vine, clinging to her brother man for support and dying when deprived of it. And all of this may sound well enough to please the imaginations of schoolgirls or lovelorn maidens. But woman, the true woman, if you would render her happy, it needs more than a mere development of her affectional nature. Her conscience should be enlightened, her faith in the true and right established, scope given to her heaven endowed and God given faculties. The true aim of female education should not be a development of one or two, but all the faculties of the human soul, because no perfect womanhood is developed by imperfect culture. Intense love is often akin to intense suffering, and to trust the whole wealth of a woman's nature on the frail bark of human love may often be like trusting a cargo of gold and precious gems to a bark that has never battled with the storm or buffeted the waves. Is it any wonder then that so many life barks go down, paving the ocean of time with precious hearts and wasted hopes? That so many float around us, shattered and dismasted wrecks? That so many are stranded on the shoals of existence, mournful beacons and solemn warnings for the thoughtless, to whom marriage is a careless and hasty rushing together of affections. Alas, that an institution so fraught with good for humanity should be so perverted, and that state of life which should be filled with happiness becomes so replete with misery. And this was the fate of Laura Lagrange. For a brief period after her marriage, her life seemed like a bright and beautiful dream, full of hope and radiant with joy. And then there came a change. He found other attractions that lay beyond the pale of home influences. The gambling saloon had power to win him from her side. He had lived in an element of unhealthy and unhallowed excitements, and the society of a loving wife, the pleasures of a well regulated home, were enjoyments too tame for one who had viviated his taste by the pleasures of sin. There were charm houses of vice, built upon dead men's loves, where, amid the flow of song, laughter, wine, and careless mirth, he would spend hour after hour, forgetting the cheek that was paling through his neglect, heedless of the tear dimmed eyes, peering anxiously into the darkness, waiting or watching his return. The influence of old associations was upon him. In early life, home had been to him a place of ceilings and walls, not a true home built upon goodness, love, and truth. It was a place where velvet carpets hushed his tread, where images of loveliness and beauty invoked into being by painter's art and sculptor's skill pleased the eye and gratified the taste, where magnificence surrounded his way and costly clothing adorned his person. But it was not the place for the true culture and right development of his soul. His father had been too much engrossed in making money, and his mother in spending it, in striving to maintain a fashionable position in society and shining in the eyes of the world, to give the proper direction to the character of their wayward and impulsive son. His mother put beautiful robes upon his body, but left ugly scars upon his soul. She pampered his appetite, but starved his spirit. Every mother should be a true artist who knows how to weave into her child's life images of grace and beauty. The true poet capable of writing on the soul of childhood the harmony of love and truth, and teaching it how to produce the grandest of all poems, the poetry of a true and noble life. But in his home, a love for the good, the true, and right had been sacrificed at the shrine of frivolity and fashion. That parental authority, which should have been preserved as a string of precious pearls, unbroken and unscattered, was simply the administration of chance. At one time, obedience was enforced by authority, at another time by flattery and promises, and just as often it was not enforced at all. His early associations were formed as chance directed, and from his want of home training, his character received a bias, his life a shade, which ran through every avenue of his existence and darkened all his future hours. Oh, if we would trace the history of all the crimes that have overshadowed this sin shrouded and sorrow darkened world of ours, how many might be seen arising from the wrong home influences or the weakening of home ties. Home should always be the best school for the affections, the birthplace of high resolves, and the altar upon which lofty aspirations are kindled, from whence the soul may go forth strengthened to act its part aright in the great drama of life with conscious, enlightened, affections cultivated, and reason and judgment dominant. But alas for the young wife! Her husband had not been blessed with such a home. When he entered the arena of life, the voices from home did not linger around his path as angels of guidance about his steps. They were not like so many messages to invite him to deeds of high and holy worth. The memory of no sainted mother arose between him and the deeds of darkness. The earnest prayers of no father arrested him in his downward course. And before a year of his married life had waned, his young wife had learned to wait and mourn his frequent and uncalled for absence. More than once had she more than once had she seen him come home from his midnight haunts, the bright intelligence of his eye displaced by the drunkard stare, and his manly gait changed to the inebriate stagger. And she was beginning to know the bitter agony that is compressed in the mournful words, a drunkard's wife. And then there came a bright but brief episode in her experience. The angel of life gave to her existence a deeper meaning and loftier significance. She sheltered in the warm, excuse me, she sheltered in the warm clasp of loving arms, a dear babe, a precious child, whose love filled every chamber of her heart, and felt the fount of maternal love gushing so new within her soul. That child was hers. How overshadowing was the love with which she bent over its helplessness. How much it helped to fill the void and chasms in her soul. How many lonely hours were beguiled by its winsome ways, its answering smiles and fond caresses. How exquisite and solemn was the feeling that thrilled her heart when she clasped the tiny hands together and taught her dear child to call God our Father. What a blessing that child was. What a blessing was that child. The father paused in his headlong career, awed by the strange beauty and precocious intellect of his child. And the mother's life had been better expression through her ministrations of love. And there came hours of bitter anguish, shading the sunlight of her home and hushing the music of her heart. The angel of death bent over the couch of her child and beaconed it away. Closer and closer the mother strained her child to her wildly heaving breast, and struggled with the heavy hand that lay upon its heart. Love and agony contended with death, and the language of her mother's heart was, "O death away, that innocent is mine. I cannot spare him from my arms, to lay him death in thine. I am a mother death, I gave that darling birth. I could not bear his lifeless limbs should moulder in the earth." But death was stronger than love and mightier than agony, and won the child for the land of crystal fonts and deathless flowers. And the poor stricken mother sat down beneath the shadow of her mighty grief, feeling as if a great light had gone out from her soul, and that the sunshine had suddenly faded around her path. She turned in her deep anguish to the father of her child, the loved and cherished dead. For a while his words were kind and tender. His heart seemed subdued, and his tenderness fell upon her worn and weary heart like rain on perishing flowers, or cooling waters to lips parched with thirst and scorched with fever. But the change was evanescent. The influence of unhallowed associations and evil habits had, had vitiated and poisoned the springs of his existence. They had bound him in their meshes, and he lacked the moral strength to break his fetters and stand erect in all the strength and dignity of true manhood, making life's excellence his ideal and striving to gain it. And yet moments of deep contrition would sweep over him when he would resolve to abandon the wine cup forever, when he was ready to forswear the handling of another card, and he would try to break away from the associations that he felt were working his ruin. But when the hour of temptation came, his strength was weakness. His earnest purposes were cobwebs, his well meant resolutions ropes of sand, and thus passed year after year of the married life of Laura LaGrange. She tried to hide her agony from the public gaze, to smile when her heart was almost breaking. But year after year her voice grew fainter and sadder. Her once light and bounding step grew slower and faltering. Year after year she wrestled with agony and strove with despair, till the quick eyes of her brother read, in the paling of her cheek and the dimming eye, the secret anguish of her worn and weary spirit. On that wan, sad face he saw the death tokens, and he knew the dark wing of the mystic angel swept coldly around her path. "Laura," her brother said to her one day, "you are not well, and I think you need our mother's tender care and nursing. You are daily losing strength, and if you will go, I will accompany you." At first she hesitated. She shrank almost instinctively from presenting that pale, sad face to the loved ones at home. That face was such a telltale. It told of heart sickness, of hope deferred, and the mournful story of unrequited love. But then a deep yearning for home sympathy woke within her a passionate longing for love's kind words, for tenderness and heart support, and she resolved to seek the home of her childhood and lay her weary head upon her mother's bosom, to be folded again in her loving arms, to lay that poor, bruised, and aching heart where it might beat and throb closely to the loved ones at home. A kind welcome awaited her. All that love and tenderness could devise was done to bring the bloom to her cheek and the light to her eye. but it was all in vain. Hers was a disease that no medicine could cure, no earthly balm would heal. It was a soul wasting of the vital forces, the sickness of the soul. The unkindness and neglect of her husband lay like a leaden weight upon her heart and slowly oozed its life drops. And where was he that had won her love and then cast it aside as a useless thing, who rifled her heart of its wealth and spread bitter ashes upon his broken altars? He was lingering away from her when the death damps were gathering on her brow, when his name was trembling on her lips, lingering away, when she was watching his coming through the death films were gathering before her eyes. When she was watching his coming, though the death films were gathering before her eyes, and earthly things were fading from her vision. I think I hear him now, said the dying woman. Surely that is his step. But the sound died away in the distance. Again she started from an uneasy slumber. That is his voice. I am so glad he has come. Tears gathered in the eyes of the sad watchers of that dying bed, for they knew that she was deceived. He had not returned. For her sake, they wished he was coming. Slowly the hours waned away, and then came the sad, soul sickening thought that she was forgotten. Forgotten in the last hour of human need. Forgotten when the spirit, about to be dissolved, paused for the last time on the threshold of existence, a weary watcher at the gates of death. He has forgotten me, again she faintly murmured, and the last tears she would ever shed on earth sprung to her mournful eyes, and clasping her hands together in silent anguish. A few broken sentences issued from her pale and quivering lips. They were prayers for strength and earnest pleading for him who had desolated her life by turning its sunshine to shadows, its smiles to tears. He has forgotten me, she murmured again, but I can bear it. The bitterness of death is past, and soon I hope to exchange the shadows of death for the brightness of eternity, the rugged paths of life for the golden streets of glory, and the care and turmoils of earth for the peace and rest of heaven. Her voice grew fainter and fainter. They saw the shadows that never deceive flit over her pale and faded face, and knew that the death angel waited to soothe their weary one to rest, to calm the throbbing of her bosom and cool the fever of her brain. And amid the silent hush of their grief, the freed spirit, refined through suffering and brought into divine harmony through the spirit of the living Christ, passed over the dark waters of death as on a bridge of light, over whose radiant arches hovering angels bent. They parted the dark locks from her marble brow, closed the waxen lids over the once bright and laughing eye, and left her to the deepless slumber of the grave. To the dreamless slumber of the grave. Her cousin turned from that deathbed a sadder and wiser woman. She resolved more earnestly than ever to make the world better by her example, gladder by her presence, and to kindle the fires of her genius on the altars of universal love and truth. She had a higher and better object in all her writings than the mere acquisition of gold or acquirement of fame. She felt that she had a high and holy mission on the battlefield of existence, that life was not given to her to be frittered away in nonsense or wasted away in trifling pursuits. She would willingly espouse an unpopular cause, but not an unrighteous one. In her, the downtrodden slave found an earnest advocate. The flying fugitive remembered her kindness as he stepped cautiously through our republic to gain his freedom in a monarchical land, having broken the chains on which the rust of centuries had gathered. Little children learned to name her with affection. The poor called her blessed, as she broke her bread to the pale lips of hunger. Her life was like a beautiful story, only it was clothed with the dignity of reality, and invested with the sublimity of truth. True, she was an old maid. No husband brightened her life with his love, or shaded it with his neglect. No children nestling lovingly in her arms called her mother. No one appended Mrs. to her name. She was indeed an old maid, not vainly striving to keep up an appearance of girlishness when departed was written on her youth, not vainly pining at her loneliness and isolation. The world was full of warm, loving hearts, and her own beat in unison with them. Neither was she always sentimentally sighing for something to love. Objects of affection were all around her, and the world was not so wealthy in love that it had no use for hers. In blessing others, she made a life and benediction, and as old age descended peacefully and gently upon her, she had learned one of life's most precious lessons, that true happiness consists not so much in the fruition of our wishes as in the regulation of desires and the full development and right culture of our whole statures. That was our first selection, which was Two Offers, and a good selection with a lot of interesting points in it. And that was written in 1859 and it's by Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. And our next selection is by Nella Larsen, and it is entitled The Wrong Man. The room blazed with color. It seemed that the gorgeous things which the women were wearing had for this once managed to subdue the strident tones of the inevitable black and white of the men's costumes. Tonight they lent just enough of preciseness to add interest to the riotously hued scene. The place was crowded but cool, for a gentle breeze blew from the sound through the large open windows and doors, now and then stirring some group of flowers. Julia Romley, in spite of the smoke colored chiffon gown, ordered specially for the occasion, which she was wearing, seemed even more flamingly clad than the rest. The pale, indefinite gray but increased the flaring mop of her hair. Scarlet, a poet had called it. The satiny texture of her skin seemed also to reflect in her cheeks a cozy tinge of that red mass. Julia, however, was not happy tonight. A close observer would have said that she was actively disturbed. Faint abstraction, trite marks nervously offered, and uncontrolled restlessness marred her customary perfect composure. Her dreamy gray eyes stole frequently in the direction of Myra Redmond's party. Myra always had a lion in tow, but why that particular man? She shook a little as she wondered. Suddenly, the orchestra blared into something wild and impressionistic, with a primitive staccato understrain of jazz. The buzz of conversation died, strangled by the savage strains of the music. The crowd stirred, broke, coalesced into twos, and became a whirling mass. A partner claimed Julia, and they became part of the swaying mob. Some show, what? George Hills's drawling voice was saying, while he secretly wondered what had gotten into Julia. She was so quiet, not unlike herself at all. Julia let her eyes wander over the moving crowd. Young men, young women, older women, slim girls, fat women, thin men, stout men glided by. The old nursery rhyme came into her mind. She repeated it to George in a sing-song tone. Rich man, poor man, beggar man, thief. Doctor, lawyer, Indian chief. George nodded. Yes, that's it. Everybody's here and a few more. And look, there's the Indian chief. Wonder who he is. He certainly looks the part. Julia didn't look. She knew what she would see. A tall, thin man, his lean face yellowed and hardened as if by years in the tropics. A man perhaps a bit unused to the scenes of this kind, purposely a little aloof, and, one suspected, more than a little contemptuous. She felt a flash of resentful anger against Myra. Why was she always carting about impossible people? It was disgusting. It was worse. It was dangerous. Certainly it was about to become dangerous to her, Julia Romley, erstwhile. She let the thought die unfinished. It was too unpleasant. She had been so happy, so secure, and now this. Ralph Tyler, risen from the past to shatter the happiness which she had grasped for herself. Must she begin all over again? She made a hasty review of her life since San Francisco days. Chicago and the art school where she had studied interior decorating with the money that Ralph Tyler had given her. New York, her studio and success. Boston and the marriage to Jim Romley. And now this envied gay life in one of Long Island's most exclusive sets. Yes, life had been good to her at last, better than she had ever dreamed. Was she about to lose everything? Love, wealth, position? She shivered. Cold? Again George's drawling voice dragging her back to the uncertain present. No, not cold. Just someone walking over my grave, she answered laughingly. I'm rotten company tonight, George. I'm sorry, I'll do better. It's the crowd, I guess. Her husband claimed her for the next dance. A happy married pair, their obvious joy in each other after 5 wedded years was a subject of amused comment and mild jokes among their friends. The everlasting lovers, they were dubbed, and the name suited them as perfectly as they suited each other. What's wrong, Julie, old girl? Jim asked after a few minutes' baffled scrutiny. Tired? Nothing, nothing at all. I just feel small. So futile in this crush. Sort of trapped, you know. Why do the Arnolds have so many people to their things? Quickly, regretting her display of irritation, she answered, It's wonderful, though. The people, the music, the color, and these lovely rooms, like a princess's ball in a fairy tale. Yes, great, he agreed. Lots of strangers here, too. Most of them distinguished people from town. Who's the tall brown man with Myra, who looks like, well, like an Indian chief? She laughed a little bit at her own pleasantry just to show Jim that there was nothing troubling her. Doesn't he, though? Sort of self sufficient and superior, and a bit indifferent as if he owned us all and despised the whole tribe of us. I guess you can't blame him much. He probably thinks we're a soft and lazy, self pampering lot. He's Ralph Tyler, an explorer, just back from some god-forsaken place on the edge of nowhere. Been head of some expedition, lost somewhere in Asia for years, given up for dead. Discovered a buried city or something. Great contribution to civilization and all that, you know. They say he brought back some emeralds worth a king's ransom. Do you know him, Jim? Yes, knew him years ago in college. Didn't think he'd remember me after such a long time and all those thrilling adventures, but he did. Honestly, you could have knocked me over with a feather when he came over to me and put his hand and said, Hello there, Jim Romley. Nice, wasn't it? Jim's handsome face glowed. He was undoubtedly flattered by the great man's remembrance. He went on enthusiastically, I'm going to have him out to the house, Julie. That is, if I can get him. Small hand-picked dinner party. What say? She shivered again. Cold? No, not cold. Just someone walking over my grave, she laughed, amused at the double duty of the superstition in one evening, and glad too that Jim had not noticed that his question had passed unanswered. Dance followed dance. She wasn't being a success tonight. She knew it, but somehow she knew she couldn't make small talk. Her thoughts kept wandering to that tall, brown man who had just come back from the world's end. One or two of her partners, after trying in vain to draw her out, looked at her quizzically, wondering if the impossible had happened. Had Julia and old Jim quarreled? At last she escaped to a small deserted room in an upper floor, where she could be alone to think. She groped about in her mind for some way to avoid that dinner party. It smelled disaster. She must find some way to keep Ralph Tyler from finding out that she was the wife of his old schoolmate. But if he were going to be here for any length of time, and Jim seemed to think that he would, she would have to meet him. Perhaps she could go away. No, she dared not. Anything might happen. Better to be on hand to ward off the blow when it fell. She sighed, suddenly weary and beaten. It was hopeless. She had been so happy. Just a faint shadow of uneasiness at first, which had gradually faded as the years slipped away. She sat for a long time in deep thought. Her face settled into determined lines. She made up her mind. She would ask, plead if necessary, for his silence. It was the only way. It would be hard, humiliating even, but it must be done if she were to continue to be happy in Jim's love. She couldn't bear to look ahead to years without him. She crossed the room and wrote a note to Ralph Tyler, asking him to meet her in the summer house in one of the gardens. She hesitated a moment over the signature, finally writing Julia Hammond, in order to prepare him a little for the meeting. After she had given the note into the hand of a servant for delivery, to Mr. Tyler, the man with Mrs. Redmond, she experienced a slight feeling of relief. At last, at least I can try, she thought as she made her way to the summer house to wait. Surely, if I tell him about myself and Jim, he'll be merciful. The man looked curiously at the woman sitting so motionless in the summer house in the rock garden. Even in the darkness, she felt his gaze upon her. Though she lacked the courage to raise her eyes to look at him, she waited expectantly for him to speak. After what seemed hours, but was, she knew, only seconds, she understood that he was waiting for her to break the silence. So she began to speak in low has in a let me go back. So she began to speak in a low, hesitating voice. I suppose you think it strange, this request of mine to meet here alone. But I had to see you, to talk to you. I wanted to tell you about my marriage to Jim Romley. You know him? Yes, I know him. Well, she went on eagerly now, you see, we're so happy. Jim's so splendid, and I've tried to be such a good wife. And I thought the eager voice trailed off on a note of entreaty. Yes, you thought? Prompted the man in a non-committal tone. Well, you see, I thought that if you knew how happy we were and how much I love him, and that since you know Jim, that she stopped. She couldn't go on. I'm sorry, she stopped. She couldn't go on. She simply couldn't. Let me get a drink of water. All right. Excuse me. So comes with reading a lot. She stopped. She couldn't go on. She simply couldn't. But she must. There he stood like a long, menacing shadow between her and the future. She began again, this time with insinuating flattery. You have so much for yourself now, honor, fame, and money, and you've done such splendid things. You've suffered too. Oh, how you must have suffered. Oh, I'm glad of your success. You deserve it. You're a hero, a great man. A little thing like that can't matter to you now, and it means everything to me. Everything. Please spare me my little happiness. Please be kind. But I don't understand. The man's voice was puzzled. How kind? What is it you're asking? Reading mask denial in the question, Julia began to sob softly. Don't tell Jim. Please don't tell Jim. I'll do anything to keep him from knowing. Anything. But aren't you making a mistake? Mistake? She laughed bitterly. I see. You think I should have told him. You think that even now I should tell him that I was your mistress once. You don't know Jim. He'd never forgive that. He wouldn't understand that. When a girl has been sick and starving on the streets, anything can happen to her. That she's grateful for food and shelter at any price. You won't tell him, will you? But I'm sure, stammered the tall figure, fumbling for cigarettes. I'm sure you've made a mistake. I'm sorry. I've been trying to. Julia cut him off. She couldn't bear to hear him speak the refusing words. His voice seemed so grimly final. She knew it was useless, but she made a last desperate effort. I was so young, so foolish, and so hungry. But Jim wouldn't understand. She choked over the last words. He shook his head, impatiently, it seemed to the agonized woman. Mrs. Romley, I've been trying to tell you that you've made a mistake. I'm sorry. However, I can assure you that your secret is safe with me. It will never be from my lips that Jim Romley hears you have been, what you say you have been. Only the woman's sharply drawn, quivering breath indicated that she had heard. A match blazed for a moment as he lighted his cigarette with shaking hands. Julia's frightened eyes picked out his face in the flickering light. She uttered a faint, dismayed cry. She had told the wrong man. And that has been our selection today from Nella Larsen, written in 1926, historical fiction. Um, as part of day 7, which is our historical fiction and nonfiction day, we have read 2 selections today, one being Two Offers by Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, and the other, The Wrong Man by Nella Larsen. And you can see these. We're going to put our cover up. And these are from Greatest Short Stories by Black Authors. And these are 2 of the selections, a great book of very interesting short stories. Some I would have loved to have read, but they are because of the dialect. We would have had a lot going on trying to make sure that we were doing what we needed to do, if you will, to get everything correct. We want to say hello to Patrick Robinson out there. Yes, we do have the same last name because we're related. Thank you, cousin, for tuning in this afternoon. And we are so glad for all of you who tune in to the International Great Black Read Aloud Day, where we're giving voice to words written by Black people all around the world. We do that with one focus and one mission, and that is for education. We are here to encourage the exploration, the purchase, and reading of works written by Black people. We believe that literacy is a legacy, and we share that with our partner, that belief with our partner at Fresh Book Festival. And so you can find out more about Fresh Book Festival at freshbookfestivals.net. And we will see you tomorrow on day 8 for art. It is day 8, and our voice is good. And so we're happy about the progress we're making this year. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day from us here at the International Great Black Read Aloud Day 2026 version. Bye bye.